What's up, everybody? This is Donald Tardy with Obituary, and you are listening to Sonic Perspective, and you are watching me right now.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Jonathan with Sonic Perspectives, and I'm here with a guy who has sort of learned over the years that, there's a lot of famous Donalds in the world, and even though his relationship to the horror genre is kind of similar to Donald Pleasance and occasionally gets mistaken on the street for Don Johnson, he still manages to stand out and have his own, twist on things here. I'm speaking, of course, to the one and only Donald Tardy, the man who made the mortuary great again. How you doing, Donald?
I'm doing great, man. How's it going, man?
That's going pretty good. How's the weather down there in Florida right now?
Well, I would have to pull up the radar and tell you, because right now I'm in Erfurt, Germany on tour. So the weather here is absolutely freezing. In fact, if I turn it around for the readers, those are two of the buses on tour, and that back there is snow. So I believe it's probably about 12 degrees outside right now. So I'm comfortably backstage right now in Germany. So it's all good. But to answer your question, in Florida, I believe it's sunny and 75 degrees.
Yeah, as usual. Yeah, well, here in the Philadelphia area, it's mild, and because I'm in the woods, it's moldy, so it's doing a number on my allergies. But I'm surviving.
Right on.
I guess this is the right band to be kind of in that disposition here, because we're hanging out in an area that's known for occasionally being a little bit moldy. Of course, we're talking about the cemetery. And speaking of which, the name of the recently released album, Dying of Everything, that sounds like a germaphobe's worst nightmare to me. So could you start off with telling us what inspired the name of the album?
Yeah, it just seemed like it fit the world right now. We all just not just musicians, not just the music industry, but the entire planet got shut down by this little microscopic thing that we were breathing in, and it was killing millions of people. So, we were just flooded for the last 3 years, two years of all this information about getting vaccinations and wearing masks and social distancing, and again, like I said, this microscopic little thing that was fucking shit up. We thought Dying of Everything was a fitting title for the album.
Yeah, it's funny when you think about it. It's got that kind of apocalyptic feel to it. And I know that both thrash metal and death metal had a little bit of a reputation for getting into that subject a bit. And I kind of do things a little chronologically. So we're going to be jumping back a little bit and then jumping back forward, because I think one thing everybody can agree on is that Obituary has a very traditional sound to it. You're a band that kind of sticks to what works, and you managed to keep it a little fresher than maybe AC/DC does in the process. So speaking for myself, I discovered death metal back in the early 90s, and as anybody who was in junior high back then will tell you, I learned about it from my two older brothers, Beavis and Butthead. So anyway, you had The Philosopher by Death was featured on that show, and also The Plague by Napalm Death. I don't remember seeing an Obituary music video on the show at the time, though, but you guys were definitely helping to turn the wheels down there in Florida at the time, especially with the second album, Cause of Death. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, time travel back to a little before that era when you guys were going by a different name. I think it was Executioner, and the music you were doing was maybe a little different than where you ended up. So I was wondering, how did that process, that evolution kind of take place early on? How did you get from maybe the more thrashy sound of like the Possessed and the Slayers of the day to where Florida ended up circa 1988, 89?
Yeah, it's simple. I mean, we're just kids that were just finding out how to even play our instruments. We were obviously horrible songwriters when you were 13, 14, and 15 years old, just figuring shit out. But, it did start with Slayer in our brains, and it couldn't be bigger Slayer fans. And of course, when you're that young, you're playing a couple cover tunes. You're playing, for us, we're playing some Sabotage stuff, some other Florida metal that was right around our neighborhood that we were influenced by. But then, of course, death metal started entering our brains, and that was with early Venom and Hellhammer, and of course then the Celtic Frost albums that everybody knows is Obituary's biggest influence. So you got to find your way through life. You got to figure out what you like as your style, and once we figured it out, we kind of went straight forward and kept focus on what we liked.
Absolutely, yeah. So when we land on "Slowly We Rot," which I think most can agree was a groundbreaking record for its year. There was a lot going on in Florida at the time, and I think sometimes we imagine in our heads something bigger than what the reality was. But Death had just released Leprosy. You got Morbid Angel coming up with Altars of Madness, and all of these bands down there, they all had their own distinct sound. It was even more, I would argue, it was a little bit more varied than even the big four of thrash. You got Morbid Angel doing the grind thing with those crazy blast beats. I'm sure at one point you took the drummer aside and said, "Dude, you got to switch to decap. You need some groove in there."
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you got Death, and you got Deicide, and everybody had their own unique sound. So where do you think Obituary's unique blend of let's say mid-pace stomp and then the kind of faster thrashing feel, where does that really
Yeah.
come in relation to the others?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. And, when I started playing drums, I was just a kid. And of course, that was the late 70s into the early 80s. So death metal wasn't even in my brain at the time. I grew up to Southern rock. I grew up to the Outlaws and Molly Hatchet and Leonard Skinner. So as a drummer with that groove, that was my metal. Anyone knows that. And then as I got older, of course, metal entered my brain. But I think some of that Southern rock stuck with us, which is that mid-tempo killer groove and good guitar riffs and stuff. And we kind of, that was in our DNA. That was what me and Trevor and my brother were listening to and getting into as children. And everybody knows, that's long before the internet, long before smartphones, and where you can see what other bands are doing with the click of a mouse. You're talking about the early and mid 80s into the early 90s, and we were just, even though we were in the same Central Florida area, we all just were kind of going for it, not worried about what other bands were doing. Again, Obituary just kind of figured out what we wanted, which was Hellhammer meets whatever it is that we were listening to as kids, and we found that niche, and we're happy and comfortable in our skin, and we kind of just went with it and didn't think too much about what other bands were doing.
Absolutely. Now, jumping a little bit ahead to the second album, Cause of Death, there was a little change in the lineup that happened there. You got a new guitar player, and some would argue you got maybe a tiny bit more technical there than you had been previously. So what was it like working with James Murphy versus, I feel like an idiot for getting the name of your original lead guitar player, by the way.
Yeah, Alan West was obviously Alan was a big part of the beginning of the band. So Alan was having some family issues that he had to deal with during the recording of Cause of Death, and so James came in, and the album was already finished recording, so he just stepped in at the very end and just did some solos on the record. And then he was in the band for a brief amount of time, and then Alan came back, and we moved on. So Cause of Death was one of those groundbreaking albums that fans still consider one of the best, and still some of the fan favorites. And I understand why, obviously. And again, if it's more technical, it was simply because the band members were maybe getting a little bit better at what they do, and our songwriting skills might have just obviously improved. You hope every time you enter the studio, and every time you write a new song, you get better than the last one. So that's probably the reason for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, an area that's not often is dealt with, I guess, because the first two albums are held in such a high regard. But what took place after, like when you get to the End Complete and the later '90s? Could you briefly get into how, like, maybe the landscape musically was kind of changing at the time, and if and how it affected the songwriting as you went along, as sort of
Yeah,
progressed?
yeah, sure. Songwriting didn't change. We're simple dudes. We don't worry too much about what's going around us or in the world of metal and what other bands were doing. We kind of stuck to our guns and just knew we had a niche, and we enjoyed. Again, we enjoyed our style. The Incomplete actually ended up being one of the biggest Roadrunner selling records there was at the time. So it was an explosion. It was catapulted thanks to Slowly Rot and Cause of Death, the stepping stones to get us up to where we were for the Incomplete. And it was it was a very big successful album for the band and for the record label. So stoked on that. And again, man, we just were young kids that were just finding out how to write better songs, and the Incomplete's a perfect testament to that.
Yeah, definitely. And briefly, this is just a personal curiosity, but when you get to 1994, around the time of World Demise, something happened that I think maybe gave death metal a little bit more mainstream appeal than it otherwise would have had, namely the infamous Cannibal Corpse appearance in Ace Ventura. Was there, after that happened, was there anybody ringing you up saying, hey, we want Obituary to appear in the new movie we're working on? It's called Ernest Goes to a Death Metal Festival. Can you show up for a few scenes?
Yeah, again, it's just one of those progressions as the band moved forward. A lot of people got the impression that we were trying to make a statement about the world and pollution and this and that, but we're such simple dudes. All we were doing was trying to do something a little different. We just had three albums released before that with typical classic killer death metal album covers and awesome artwork. And we just thought, you know what, let's try something we had the idea for the title World Demise, and just kind of the Don't Care video along with that album cover. All of a sudden we're a band that's discussing and talking about the world's population problem and pollution problem, but we really weren't, man. We were just trying to mix it up a little bit and make it a little bit different looking album and feeling album than the last three.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed that sometimes the media can make more out of certain things that are originally there, and there are a lot of outlets out there that kind of credit you guys with starting what was known as the death and roll craze of the mid '90s. I think that was something that was originally coined by the guys in Entombed. But you want to speak a little on your thoughts on that sort of little interesting side trail that death metal took during that time period?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that you can come out with one album cover, that is different than just blood and gore and guts and creatures on it, and one video that happens to be a little bit different than, again, just a typical death metal album. And people think you're trying to make a huge statement, and that the band really thought about this for months and years to make a big stink. But it was like literally split-second decision on what could be cool, what could be a little bit different. And we thought about it way less than the rest of the world thought about it. Again, we are simple dudes. We keep shit simple, and we didn't even think too much about it. The world put so much more into that thought than the band did when we released, World Demise.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Now there was a brief, there was a period of, I guess you could say, hiatus. Not too long after that, I think Obituary kind of went to a period of sleep in the graveyard in the late '90s into the 2000s, and then I think it was mid 2000s you decided to kind of get things going again. I think you reconnected with Scott Burns, right, for the Frozen in Time album, right?
Well, yeah, but I think before that there was actually a pretty short hiatus, and it was at that time that we actually released. After that, we released Back from the Dead, and Back from the Dead was the album that we actually stepped away from Morrisound recordings, and we stepped away from Scott Burns, and we actually went down to Miami, Florida, to another studio down there called Criteria Studios, extremely famous studio. And we brought in a new producer for the first time, Jamie Locke. So that was after Obituary's first hiatus. But when you're a band for 3 decades plus, sometimes you got to just go tuck away for a little while and recharge and get away from the music scene for a little bit. And we didn't even know we were going to do that. We just, we kind of got away for a couple of years, and then we came back with Back from the Dead.
Yeah, it's excellent. Everybody kind of has this picture in their head of Scott Burns because of his pivotal role in sort of defining the early death metal sound. I mean, personally, when I think of him and he looks at your album, I was like, slowly we rot, cause of death. Excellent. And so anyway, when the band sort of got back into the studio with him for Frozen in Time, one of your signature live staples actually came out of that album, Redneck Stomp. Now, is there any this is partially done in jest, but any deeper meanings there, or is that just an excuse for death metal fans to get up and dance?
Yeah, no, it's Redneck Stomp is an interesting story because my brother's in he's obviously the one in charge of his lyrics and his singing and what he wants to do and what he doesn't want to do, and that was the true hiatus. That was when we were gone for nearly 7 years, I believe, and this was actually the first studio that we came back, but we actually Scott was not a part of Frozen in Time. It was Mark Prater, who's one of the original Morrisound Studios engineers that was with us for nearly my entire career, and he was the one that engineered that album with us. But Redneck Stomp was interesting because when Alan West and I wrote it, we knew it had groove. We knew it was killer. And while we were practicing it and at band practice, and when we were writing the album, my brother just kind of was still over there jotting stuff down on his lyric sheets after every time we would be, practicing those new songs for Frozen in Time. And it was Redneck Stomp that my brother was finally he just threw his hands up. He's like, you know what? I don't feel anything. I don't feel the need to sing on this song. And who's to say that that's a good thing or a bad thing? And so we were like, at first we were like, really? So it's going to be an instrumental. And John just kind of said, you know what? I think it's going to be. And once we grooved it and we played it a few times, the band didn't complain. We were like, you know what? This song's killer. This song's got groove. It gives you one of those feelings that you don't need to talk too much about it. It's just, it is what it is. It's basic, but it's killer. And the interesting story to that song and to Frozen in Time, that release was Obituary had been gone for 7 years. It was then time to come back, and we owed Roadrunner Records one more song for the one more album for the contract that we signed as children. And when we were finished with the album's recording, it was then time to put the songs in order on what, how you're going to listen to this album. And it was very clear to the band when we were doing it. We knew we wanted this the first song on the album, and and we told that to the record label, and they lost their shit. They were like, "You can't do this. You guys have been gone for 7 years. That is a terrible decision. You should not do that." And it was funny to us because, first of all, we're the artist, so who knows more about what the album needs to be and how the vibe and how the flow of an album goes more than the artist. Are you going to tell me that some dude at a record label sitting behind a desk is going to tell me what's smarter about an album than myself? And so there was no question. We just said, you either accept it and be positive about it, or you can fuck off, because this is how the album is going to start. And sure enough, it was a hit. Fans, we knew, because it's been 7 years. What are fans waiting for? They're waiting for John's voice. So what are you going to do? You're going to play a 3-minute tune of just grooving. And that had to have made fans like, what the fuck is happening here, man? What's going to happen? Who went? And here it comes. When is it going to happen? John's going to sing any minute. And it ended up being instrumental. And of course, that's still a staple in Obituary's live show. We still end up playing it first every night because it's a good warm-up for the crowd. It's a good warm-up for our old 50-year-old bones. And it's just a classic song. It ended up being one of the most popular Obituary songs, and it's an instrumental.
Yeah, I've always thought there was a certain logic to starting off with an overture, actually, and I'm surprised the label didn't pick up on that, because that's how a lot of the old movies were. You had the overture where everybody could find their seats and everything, and then you actually meat and potatoes of things. So briefly, the next album after this was another brief one-off collaboration with one of metal's most iconic guitarists, God rest his soul, Ralph Santola. So any brief thoughts on working with him in the studio, or anything at all there?
Yeah, Ralph was one of my very dear friends, and was for a long time, and very proud that he was on those next 2 albums with us. And I can personally say that I've never sat next to a guitarist with such talent. To see that dude come into the studio at 9 in the morning and listened to the song that Trevor and I just finished. And there was no like, okay, let me get the song and bring it home and work something out for the solo, and I'll be back tomorrow to do it. Ralph was just like, hit record, let's see what happens. And I've never experienced such talent on guitar solos, and the phrasing, and just the sheer shredding that Ralph put down every take. And we were recording our own albums. That was the beginning of Obituary, owning our Pro Tools rig. We turned our practice room into our studio, and with Ralph, I learned a lot on Pro Tools and how to record, and how to record quickly, and how to record different takes and different versions. And Ralph was so incredible that he would finish a solo, and it was so jaw-droppingly amazing. I was just like, I'm like done. I can't believe how good that was. He's like, yeah, but hang on, just do another playlist, man. Let me try that again. I'm like, Ralph, that was so fucking awesome. Don't even bother. He's like, listen, I'll play another solo, and if the other one that we just did, if you like it better, you can go back to that playlist and we'll play that. I'm cool with that. He would do another one. I was like, oh, even better. And that went on and on and on. So those Pro Tools sessions that Ralph was on, we have so many amazing solos that Ralph put down on Darkest Day and Executioner's Return. Those were the two albums that we released off with Ralph in the band, and absolute honor for him to be in the band. And like you said, man, God rest him. And he was a very close friend of mine, and I miss him dearly.
Yeah, he's kind of a testament to the fact that there is an overlap between the more extreme side of metal and, the more traditional, the traditional 80s guys. And
Yeah.
he's a very big selling point, actually, for, a bunch of death metal bands. I mean, he even played some solos for Pathology, which is about as far removed as you can get from traditional heavy metal.
Yeah. And I get it, the hardcore, true old school death metal fans that were like, it just didn't blend, it didn't fit. Ralph's solos were almost too much, and part of me agrees with that. But also the experience that I had as a musician, and also as an early engineer recording the band and figuring it out, he taught me a lot. Like, that dude's a musician beyond musician. I mean, he's Michael Schenker type shit, and it was just incredible. And especially now that he's gone off this planet, I'm so privileged and honored and thrilled that there's Obituary albums that we get to go back and we get to listen to Ralph. Because again, I understand when people say it was just a little bit too much and the Alan West stuff was, more fitting. I agree. But now that it's history and you can go back, I hope fans do take the time to find Executioner's Return and Darkest Day record, because some of Ralph's solos are some of the best solos I've ever experienced in my life in heavy metal music.
Yeah, definitely. And with that, it's kind of interesting that from there, kind of going into that, maybe somewhat different place, there was kind of a homecoming that followed. And I think part of it came with Alan coming back to the band. But the last two albums before the current one, I think you kind of went back to your roots a bit more and kind of dug into that earlier era. Would that be a proper assessment of both Inked in Blood and the self-titled album? Or
Well, I mean, it's a close one, except that Alan never returned with us.
Oh.
Alan fought his demons with substance abuse and prison time and all that shit.
Yeah.
And which is sad, because Alan has been my friend since I was 15 years old. But in comes Ken Andrews, and Ken Andrews has been a friend of mine for a long time. We were in the band Andrew WK together. That's how we met. That's how I kind of put him into the music scene. And so, once Ralph and Ken was around, he was actually our guitar tech when Ralph was in the band. So he and Ralph were friends as well. So it was just a very natural transition to get Kenny into the band, because he's an incredible guitar player. He's a contributor on the last two albums as a songwriter as well. So Inked in Blood was, where he got his feet wet, and he did the solos on Inked in Blood, and it was the beginning of the new puzzle. It was final piece to the puzzle with Obituary, because Terry Butler bass guitar wise, you know, he's been in a band now going on 15, 16 years, and he's been friends of ours for going on 40 years. So that kind of feels like he's been there the whole time. But with Kenny, you know, it was a great transition, and it was something the band really wanted, because he had already been touring with us as a guitar tech. He also filled in some of the shows for Ralph. He filled in on bass guitar actually as well at a certain point. So Ken was already a part of the touring party. He just needed to be an official member of the band, and Inked in Blood was the beginning of that. And then, like you said, we move on then to the self-titled album, and that was Kenny's first attempt at actually writing with us, and he wrote 2 songs off the self-titled album, and just incredible. You know, he's a great piece to the puzzle. His background is more thrash metal, so it brings a different flavor a little bit than just the typical mine and Trevor's death metal background, and you can hear it in his songs that he's written on these last 2 albums with us.
Yeah, I did notice a slight bit more of that old sort of transitional thrashy death metal sound on some of the songs. Kind of took me back to the Leprosy days a little bit, and so yeah. I got my timelines mixed up a little there, but I did know that Ken came into the picture by
Yeah,
the self-titled album, Inked in Blood. Full confession here is the album I'm probably the least familiar with, because it's in that area where I listened to it heavily at the time. Then it
yeah,
got put on the back burner for the
yeah.
next, now the current one. So now coming into the present here with Dying of Everything, he just came off a fantastic tour before the release of the album with Amon Amarth. I was actually fortunate enough to catch the show at the Fillmore in Philly
Oh, nice.
back in
Awesome.
November, and did a little write-up for Brave Words on it. And I also got the privilege of reviewing the album for Sonic Perspective. So I managed to get intimately involved with the album before talking to you. So I got a few brief questions, because I am unfortunately on a limited time frame here. But as far as the recording and the production process of the album, was there anything different you did this time versus, say, the previous 2 albums?
I mean, we completely revamped the Pro Tools rig at our studio. So, you know, we simply just record the songs. So, you know, we've had this working order of figuring it out, and how do you make it the best you can. And the self-titled album, it goes actually back to the 10,000 Ways to Die release. You know, when we did 10,000 Ways to Die, we have a great chemistry now with our he's our live sound engineer. His name's Joe Senkata, but he's also our studio guy now. So we record the songs in Florida, and then when we're done with the tracking of the album, we send him the files, and that's where the magic happens. He's up there in New York at Full Force Studio, and he's our guy. You know, we have a great chemistry right now. We hand him off the files, and he turns it into the magic that everybody's hearing now on these last 2 albums. So it's not necessarily anything new that we did. It's just that we're honing in on our skills, and we're just kind of figuring it out.
Yeah, the album definitely has a more it definitely has an organic feel that fits in perfectly with the overall Obituary sound. I think I watched a couple interviews you did previously, and I noticed that you like to try to avoid getting too into the weeds with the post-production stuff and all the
Yeah,
editing, sampling, and
yeah.
everything. You just told the producer, don't necrophagus our Obituary here, please, right?
Yeah, man, and you know, we've been playing our instruments for a long time, so we know that if you play, you know, it's simple. It's like John Bonham. You could put 500 microphones around the kit, or you could put one microphone around the drum kit. Just play the song well. If you play it clean and you play your instrument tight, you're handing off files that then the engineer can really do his thing, and he can focus on the magic and not having to fix a bunch of shit. So, you know, my words to Joe was simple, man. Let's keep it as real sounding as we can, because I think I played well and I love the sound of my drum kit. And he took that and he put his magic to it, and the album, I think, came out great, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as the current tour that you're doing right now, I did not check setlist.com for any songs featured. What are some of the new entries from the album that are making it to the set list right
Yeah,
now?
you know, we're one of 4 bands on this bill, so you know we're one of the support bands. So we're down to certain minutes on stage, and you got to play the classics. But you know, at this point right now, man, we're playing The Wrong Time.
Mm.
which really is going off awesome. The positive reaction with the crowd is incredible. And then, of course, we're playing the title track, and that is a Ken song. It's one of the songs that Ken and I wrote together. So we got a Trevor and me song, and we got a Ken and me song on this tour. So both songs are fantastic right now, going very well. And then, of course, Obituary's got to play some of the classics for the fans.
Yeah, definitely. And briefly, can you list the other bands that are on the tour?
Yeah, Malevolence. They were a newer band from England. I was unfamiliar with them, and when I checked them out before the tour, I was like, man, these dudes are this is like New York hardcore. Like this is like old agnostic front meets sick of it all meets madball type shit, which I love. I mean, that's kind of where I am if I'm not listening to southern rock or death metal. And then of course, our Florida brothers Trivium is on this tour. They were the ones that actually reached out to us and said it would be killer to have you guys on this tour. And then our German friends, Heaven Shall Burn. So it's quite the package. Obituary chose this tour on purpose because it puts us in front of new people. Heaven Shall Burn is heavy metal, and so is Trivium, but I don't think their fans are as familiar with death metal as they need to be. So we wanted to jump on this tour to get in front of new eyeballs and hopefully to gain new fans and new friends, and I think we're doing that nightly.
Yeah, sounds like you're really getting to the core of things there, no pun intended. But
Yeah,
there is a common thrash root, I think, between all of the bands involved there. So there's
yeah.
definitely crossover appeal potential there, definitely.
Yeah, and to sum up your and I conversation for the American fans that are watching is, like you said, the Amon Carcass Obituary Cattle Decapitation tour that just happened. That was us promoting this new album, and now that it's finally out, within just a couple days from now, American fans can feel free to get excited because we got big news with a big tour that Obituary is about to announce. That's gonna bring us on stage for more minutes and be able to play a lot of these new songs along with all the Cause of Death stuff and the Slowly Rot songs. So feel free to stay tuned to the Obituary socials, and we got a great announcement coming up, literally within the next day or week or so, for fans to get excited, and we're gonna unleash ourselves to the American fans.
All right. Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. So that's actually a good pivot point for us to close things out here because
Right
unfortunately
on.
we're on a meter here. I'm on the basic Zoom plan, and you kind of know how
I
that.
figured that.
All right. So any final remarks for the fans before we say adieu?
Yeah, man, keep your eyes and ears posted because the socials are about to explode with something that American fans are going to get excited about. And thanks for joining us. Thank you, brother. Hope that was a decent interview for you, and I'm glad you're digging the new album. And I hope the fans pick up that new record and get ready to come find us on this new announcement that we're about to throw out.
Oh yeah, 100%, brother. All right.
Cool.
So thanks a lot for listening, everybody. This is Jonathan with Sonic Perspectives, and we'll catch you next time.